We would like to welcome you all to the Community Violence Intervention Addressing Gangs, Essential Partnerships for Leading a Community-Based Response webinar. As a reminder, this webinar is being brought to you by the National Gang Center, which is supported by the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. The National Gang Center exists to help communities implement comprehensive solutions to prevent gang violence, reduce gang involvement, and suppress gang-related crime. For more information about the Gang Center, we recommend visiting our website at nationalgangcenter.ojp.gov, or as listed here on the slide. I will now go ahead and turn it over to our moderator for today, Dr. Celeste Vojdalevich of the National Gang Center, to begin the webinar. Thank you, Celeste.
Thank you, Sterling, and it's nice to be with everyone today. Welcome to our session. We're glad that you're joining us, and we know many of you have probably joined us for previous webinars that we've conducted, and this is just part of the series, and we hope that we are building on the information that we presented before, and we can offer you some additional insight today. So with that, I'd just like to go to our next slide. These are just the webinar objectives for today's session. So at the conclusion of the webinar today, this is what we hope that you will come away with. We hope that you will be able to identify key multidisciplinary partners to guide the process of developing and implementing a data-driven and comprehensive community-based response to community violence. And as many of you have heard in previous webinars that we've presented, data-driven is really key to having a good program, a solid program that can build sustainability, and you'll be hearing a lot about that today during our discussion. We want you also to recognize strategies to engage partners and strengthen partner relationships. We know that without having others involved in the initiative and joined for a common cause, that it's very difficult to accomplish things on our own. We know oftentimes people work in silos, and we'll be talking about some of the ways to get around that and ways to really build those positive collaborations. And the third thing we have here is clarify the roles and responsibilities of key partners involved in community violence reduction initiatives. This is very important to understand your purpose, your responsibility, how you fit into the whole piece of this initiative that you're working on together. So we are very excited about the presentation today. To begin with, I am going to now lead into our presenter, and that will be followed up with the panel discussion. And we have some excellent presenters and panelists here today. So with that, I would like to introduce our presenter, Paul Callanan. It's nice to see you, Paul. Paul has over 30 years of experience within the criminal justice field, providing cross-sector leadership and guidance to system-level partnerships and community-led collaborations, seeking comprehensive outcome-driven solutions to complex public safety and social issues. He specializes in sustainable gang violence reduction efforts. He has led strategic planning, development, and implementation of several successful violence reduction projects across the country. Mr. Callanan currently serves as the Assistant Director for the Mayor's Office of Safe and Healthy Neighborhoods in Louisville, Kentucky. So welcome, Paul. And if you'd like to add anything to my introduction, now's your time to do it. So with that, I'll give you the floor. Thanks, Paul.
No, thank you, Celeste, and good afternoon and good morning to everybody. I want to thank the Gang Center for bringing us together, because I think this is a really important topic to talk about, particularly now in our country. So you can go to the next slide, please. At this point in our country, it's no secret to everybody that we're seeing a huge increase of violent crime, gun-related violence around the country. And, it's tough because we're coming off of a pandemic, and the pandemic really set new rules and norms of how we talk to each other, how we collaborate. and how we navigate technology to come together to address issues. We're also coming off of periods and still in some areas experiencing periods of, civil discourse that has really torn at some of the relationships that may have been developed in communities before, but those relationships are now stressed because of the reasons behind some of that discourse that was going on around the country. So it's an opportunity to come together now and talk about, okay, how do we reevaluate what we're doing to address violence? How do we reevaluate these factors that have affected us in partnering together to address violence? And really, we want to come together because we know through the research, through our efforts over the last 30, 40 years, that while there's a lot of good programs out there, if we really want to address violence in our community and sustain violence reduction efforts in our community, we have to build partnerships, we have to build collaborations, but that's not necessarily an easy thing to do. Next slide, please. So we know that what one agency can do it alone, and there are a lot of good organizations out there, and there are a lot of people doing good work every day, but due to the complexities that drive violence or gun violence and gang violence, it's nearly impossible for one organization to really address all those issues and those variables in a way that can achieve overall reduction. You may have success with a population that you're working with. You may have success in a smaller neighborhood that you're working with, but overall in a city, in a community, it really takes this collaborative effort, and not really one agency can do that by themselves. So let's go. So what we're going to talk about the next 15 minutes or so is why is it important for these collaborations? What do collaborations bring to the table? And more importantly, when we agree to collaborate, how do we manage these collaborations? Because they can be very, very difficult to do. So the value of a collaborative engagement really involves three things, right? The first is sort of the diversity of stakeholders. You're bringing together a large number of individuals that are looking at a problem from different angles. And that's important because if we're developing strategies, we want to know if these strategies are effective, but more importantly, we want to know that our strategies don't cause any harm to any groups in the community. So it's important for us to really understand the different views and perspectives related to the issues that we're dealing with. And we do that by bringing a diverse group of stakeholders together. When you bring a diverse group of stakeholders together, again, you're getting three things for this. You're getting shared voice, and that is everybody's given their opinion. Everyone has an opportunity at the table to discuss what they believe the problem is, what the problem, how that problem impacts them, and maybe some ideas and some solutions that we can bring to the table. So you're sharing that voice of that group, and you're coming together with those different ideas. The second component to that is you're creating a shared ownership. And that is, if you're an organization, especially we see this a lot with city organizations, you're tasked with developing a plan to reduce violence in the city. That's very stressful. There's no way one organization is going to do that. So when you create a collaborative engagement, you're bringing partners together, there's a joint ownership in that process. And we all share that responsibility. You all earn that, own that responsibility of that problem. And that actually adds to your level of commitment. When I feel like I own a problem and I'm responsible for that problem, I'm actually going to participate a lot longer rather than pushing that off to, oh, that's their responsibility, or those are those folks' responsibility. So you're collecting, you're developing through a collaborative effort, you're developing a shared voice, a shared ownership. And those two elements right there create sort of this shared willingness to address the problem. Like it cultivates the collective efficacy that's needed to bring people together in the strength. It's interesting, if we're looking at how to address gangs in the community or how to address individuals in gangs, one thing that we look at is the level of cohesion within that group or that gang itself. How tight are they? How close are they? And that's going to determine my strategies, whether I'm trying to pull someone out of a group or how I'm going to try to dismantle that group as a whole, is looking at that level of cohesion. The cohesion provides strength. That also applies to how we respond to violence. That level and that strength of our collaboration is really based upon that level of cohesion within that collaboration, those partnerships. Do we trust each other? Do we value each other? Do we respect each other? That we're really going to come together and work efficiently and effectively together. Next slide. So the value of collaborative engagement, there's really two areas to look at this as well too. You're looking at there's the basic operational values of a collaborative engagement. It promotes cross-sector understanding. When you're bringing people together, we get a better understanding of what we're each doing. We're all experts in our areas, but we may not know what each other does. So by bringing people together, we get this joint understanding. Now I know better of what you do, and I have a better understanding of how I can support you or how I can work with you or coordinate with you. So it promotes cross-sector understanding of issues and partnerships. It breaks down communication silos. The biggest issue we see when building partnerships or looking for solutions is there's some level of hostility sometimes between groups in the community. And we find when we start peeling away levels of that hostility or those barriers to partnerships, it all comes back to communication. I heard this organization didn't want to do this, or I heard this organization believes in this. But when you come together and you set up a system where there's an effective communication, you're breaking down those silos and you're able to talk together and you're able to understand, again, where each organization comes from, and you're able to communicate effectively in that manner. It nurtures the exchange of innovative ideas. And that's important, right? Because we don't want to push ideas on each other. We all have ideas, but when you bring people together, you can take your individual ideas and they can become group ideas, and they may even become innovative. Someone starts off and says, hey, look, we've been looking at doing this type of project and works with this type of population. And another group says, look, we're working at the same thing, but we're coming from a different angle. What if we work together? And wow, look, this is a whole different idea that we have, and a bigger, stronger, effective idea. So it does bring together that communication where we're talking about new ideas and innovative ideas and how to work together. Facilitates access to multiple data sources. And that's going to be critical. Data sources are going to be critical in two areas. One is your assessment of what you're trying to address. If you're effectively going to address an issue in your community, a violence issue, you're going to need to assess what that is. And you're going to look at a wide range of data sources. You're looking at crime data, you're looking at demographic data, you're looking at personal data of individuals, you're looking at success data from organizations, but also not just on the assessment, but the evaluation as well too. So you want to be able to think about, if you're putting a program together and you're working with a group of kids in probation, and your goal at the end of the day is to change, recidivism rates or change behaviors, you're going to have to be able to access some data to support what you're doing and showing that you're having success. And you may not have access to that data, so you may have to build partnerships. So it does allow us to bring a larger set of data sets to the table to look at for assessment and evaluations. It creates efficiencies in resource distribution. That means we're reducing, redundancy, we're reducing duplication. This is probably the biggest, I think, pro to a collective engagement is resource allocation and how we use joint resources. Most projects will go after funding first, build a project, and then worry about the sustainability. But if you look at your partners and what resources they bring to the table on the front end, you can build an entire model just based on what programs, what resources are available right now, and then use existing and then use funding sources or grant funding to fill in the gaps. So you're addressing sustainability on the front end. Great, probably number one reason for collaboration is resource distribution. Avoids duplication of services. We talked about that. You want to build a model, you want to build partnerships, but you don't want your partners competing with each other. So there has to be clarity of what they're doing. And we don't want to provide the same services. For those cities that do hospital violence intervention programs, for example, where they're providing treatment services to individuals to show up in the emergency room for gunshot wounds, they have a whole intervention component at the hospital that immediately starts working with that youth or that individual or their family or their survivors. But the reality is most individuals, or a good percent of individuals that present at the emergency room, are probably under some level of community supervision, or probably have engaged in services from other organizations. So we want to set up processes. We're not duplicating us. We're now offering services to an individual that already has services from a project in another project in the community. So really avoids duplication, which saves money and provides greater access to the targeted population. You may have a good idea. You want to work with young girls that are impacted by human trafficking, or young kids that are high risk to be involved in gang violence, but you have to be able to have access to those youth. And how do you bring those youth into your programs? When you have a collaborative and you're having multiple partner agencies, you're just expanding your referral source from this to this. You're getting a wide range of organizations that can help connecting you and connect with those populations that you're looking at. Next slide, please. What's the value of a collaborative engagement? And you're looking at two things. We already talked about the benefits of really leveraging existing resources on that and how that pertains to not just sustainability of your project, but also how big can your project grow? How many ideas do you have? The more partners you have at the table, the larger you can build a project on that, right? The more strategies you can put in place, and the more likely you're going to sustain your project over the long term. But in the short value of that, if you're looking at what we bring to the table through a collaborative, it's that shared resources, right? It's personnel. A lot of times, when you're bringing collaborations together, we have a lot of strategies in place. One organization doesn't have the ability to manage that with the personnel that they have or provide those services. So agencies are able to say, look, all I can provide is I can provide a staff member to this project, or I can provide, their time and energy to this project. Time is another thing. When you're implementing programs, especially in the early stages, there's a lot of work in developing and getting these programs off the ground. If it's one organization that's doing it, one or two people, it's going to take time. If it's a collaborative, a lot of people working on different elements during the development and implementation phase, your time from thought to actually implementation is going to be a lot shorter, and it's going to go by quicker, and you're going to be able to implement your program faster. Physical space, right? Often we have really good programs. We want to go target a neighborhood, but we don't have an office space in that area, or this program would be a great program, but they don't have office space in there. So you have partners that come to the table and say, look, we have a large building that we can house other agencies in this building. So you're taking advantage of the physical space that other organizations may have and can offer to you to provide your programs. Funding. Funding is the number one reason that I believe like a lot of partnerships fall apart, because we fight over the funds. But when you look at a collaborative engagement, as I said earlier, if you begin to build your ideas and your models based off of existing programs and existing funding that you have right now, you'd be amazed at how many programs you can put in place by just saying, if we work together differently. I know this organization does this and this organization does this. We bring them together. Now we have a new process, a new program, and it's more powerful. And you look at the funding for really in the sense of, how do we fill in those gaps? Or if you're looking for partners, and we'll talk a little bit about this later, you're bringing partners to the table, foundations. If you're looking for outside funding sources, think about that in the early stages and bring those folks to the table. And more importantly, you bring in that wide, vast set of knowledge, skills, expertise, and passion to the table, right? We're all experts in what we do, but we're not all experts in everything that we need to know about violence reduction. So if I'm looking at communities that have suffered a lot of injustice, and I know that if I'm working with young Black males and racial therapy or racial trauma therapy is something that I need, my organization doesn't provide that. Before I can reach these kids, I know I have to address that or some other level of trauma. Who are my partners? Who are the experts in that area? How does that work? When I was in Denver, for example, we were able to train 10,000 case managers over the course of our project life for $700, just because we capitalized on the expertise and knowledge and skills of the people within our city to provide free training to all of our partners within our network. So be innovative on that and capitalize on the partnerships that you have. Next screen, please. So we do have this shared responsibility. Again, I want to come back to that. And when you have that shared responsibility, you have that shared ownership that comes with that. And then, if you're part of that ownership, like I said, I can't stress, when you give a voice and you give ownership to a collective group of people, you're going to see that commitment a lot higher than folks who are just sitting on the outskirts and looking inwards. When they're actually participating and they feel they have a say and they feel they have an obligation to do something, they're going to do it, and they're going to provide what you're looking for. Next slide. So you have this idea, and all of you may be at different points of where your project is at. You may just have a concept right now that you want to put together, and you're thinking about, who do I need to bring together? You may already have received funding for a specific type of strategy or program, and now you're looking at who should be at the table and who do I need to get this off the ground. The number one thing you need to do when you're coming to this point of who are the essential partners and who I should bring together is you have to have a clear understanding of what it is that you want to do. If you want to work at the individual level and focus on a specific population and provide direct services to a population, then you're going to be looking at who are those partners related to that group, right? If you're looking at community level changes, then what partners are you going to have at the table to make community level changes? And if you're looking at more of a comprehensive approach to violence reduction in your city, and even you want to address social determinants of violent crime, as well as not just direct services, and you're looking at policy changes, then you're going to be looking at a wider net of who needs to come to the table. So first step is understand, have a clear understanding of what it is that you want to do to address the violence, and then determine who you need to bring to the table. If you're not sure, then you bring a vast group of people from diverse backgrounds to the table. Next slide. So when we're picking who should be at the table, this is going to be critical. You want to pick people that can help, support your project, that you can share ideas with, but really have that same passion that maybe you or your organization has as you want to move forward. And the way we'll do this is, I would recommend is a couple of things. One is you're looking at who your primary stakeholders are. That is, if I want to provide direct services to young males that are involved in gang violence, who do I need at the table? Who in this community are working with young males right now that can provide me referrals and provide accesses? Who are the service providers working with this population of individuals? What are the types of services that need to be presented to these individuals to help promote behavior change? So I'm looking at every aspect of this, and in this circle you have here of who should be involved. It's sort of generic in the sense of, you're looking at a comprehensive approach, this is who you're going to invite. You're going to invite law enforcement, you're going to invite employment services, community leaders, faith organizations, government agencies, parole, probation, street outreach. These are typically in a more of a comprehensive approach. But again, you're going to be looking at, what exactly is. You may be focused on victims, and you're going to be looking at victim advocates. You're going to be looking at those organizations in the community that address victims. You're going to be looking at those organizations in the community that may support families and survivors and individuals of gun violence. So again, have a concept of what you're looking for, and then begin to look at who do you really need at the table to make sure that you can move forward with your idea. And then there's a secondary group of people you want to look at, and that is, you're looking at those people that may not have a direct involvement in what you're doing as far as services and identifying or reaching populations, but more importantly, they could be funders, foundations. For example, if I'm building a project and I'm thinking about sustainability, and you should be thinking about that on the front end, I want to bring funders in early on the project. I want to bring them early on the planning so they fully understand what's going on. I may not be asking money from them right now because I have a grant somewhere, but I want to continue this down the line. But it's easier to bring people in the earlier stages to give them better understanding than to try to bring them in at a later stage and say, well, this is what we built. You're going to bring in academic folks, people that can really look at your program and really provide you with the adequate and updated academic information of what works, what doesn't, what are good ideas, what programs have been tried elsewhere, what are some of those results. So always look at primary, secondary stakeholders. You want to maintain a project that's manageable. So it's great to say, I want to have all these partners. You can do that in a listening session or a convening session. You can bring people together and talk about ideas. But on the planning, on your initial stages, you want to keep it manageable, probably no more than 20 representatives from different organizations that are out there. And you want to make sure that you're bringing the right people from those organizations to the table, right? Early on, you may only get line staff or lower level staff to come listen to you, but eventually you want to bring department heads, you want to bring agency heads to the table, because you want them to make commitments to your project. You don't want to start developing projects and getting ideas rolling, and they're ideas from people who don't have the ability to make those decisions or commitments from the organizations, only to run into a roadblock down the line that what one organization promised they can't deliver because their agency administration didn't agree to it or doesn't even know what's going on. So always shoot for the top. Next slide, please. So how do we engage partners, right? In the perfect world, we all come together and we work together because that's the right thing to do, right? We are all tired of the violence. We don't want kids dying. We don't want people dying. We want to provide services. We're all committed to that. That's great. But in reality, sometimes it's hard to bring people together because we all have different missions. Organizations have different goals that they have to hit. They have different obligations and responsibilities. So a lot of times it's what's in it for me. And that's the sort of the dirty side of collaboration, and people don't want to understand sometimes is you bring people to the table out of interest, but to fully get them committed to you, they have to get something out of it. So you have to fully understand when you're reaching out to partner agencies, you need to give yourself an understanding and take a look at what is the mission of those agencies? Why are you bringing them to the table? And it's not so much when you're reaching out to them of saying, what you can do for this project. It's what we can do to help support you on your mission by you joining this project. So we're going to get you to where you want to be when you join this project. So we're going to align your mission with our mission of reducing violent crime. But if you're probation and you have to reduce recidivism, we're going to guarantee you new programs so your recidivism rates are going to go down. Right. So there is a buy-in for everybody, and you have to find out what that buy-in is. And it's not just simply the right thing to do, because that's not the way we work. We have obligations. We have financial obligations that we have to meet. We have changes in agencies that go on. Often I hear this from government employees the most. It's easier not to collaborate because there's a lot of difficulty in bringing partners together and managing those. When you're trying to bring partners together, and you're looking, you may not know everybody. You may say, look, I have a strained relationship with this group, but I need this group to be part of my early planning or part of this project. Look at leveraging whoever else is out there, your partners. Again, when you're looking at gangs, if you're familiar with the focused deterrence approach, when we're doing if you do like the GVI project, where you're delivering a message to gangs about, what's going to happen if they continue to be involved in violence, you're looking at who the influencers are. Who are those individuals within the social networks that have connections to multiple groups in the community, and you bring them in and you give them the message and they go out to the community and they deliver it to the multiple groups. Same thing if you have an idea and you're building a collaboration. If you have individuals or organizations that you want to reach out to, but you're not sure how they're going to respond to that, or you're not sure who you can get to the table because you're new to the area or you don't know folks, look at those people that you can partner with that are influencers in your community, in your areas, that can bring people to the table. So reach out to them first and then have them bring people in. Again, it's identifying those champions in the community that can communicate the need for others. Sometimes there's organizations that simply just don't want to participate, but if you have the right partners and they put the right peer pressure on those organizations, because that organization is really necessary for you to move forward, peer pressure works. Right? There's an obligation for them to come in. So don't feel like you as an individual have to do this by yourself. Look at those advocates, look at those influencers, look at those champions in the community, bring them in as well too. They'll help you build your network. And always illustrate the concern with data and stories. Why is it that you want to come in, right? People are touched by that. They want to know, that if I'm going to commit my time, I'm going to commit resources, I'm going to commit something. I want something tangible that I can see. And visual stuff works better than just auditory, right? If you just speak to someone, you say, well, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, they don't understand. If you can show them a story, you can give them a visual representation of what you're trying to do, you're going to get them to better understand and actually maybe soften any sort of resistance that they may have. So next slide. Coming together is the beginning, keeping together is progress, and working together is success. Henry Ford. I think this is the greatest quote that relates to any cross-sector collaboration that we're putting together. If you think you're going to put a cross-sector collaboration together and it's going to be a short period of time, you need to reevaluate that, because it takes time to build collaborations. Coming together is just when you're bringing people together in the front end. You're deciding who's out there. And to do that, you really have to understand relationships in the community. If I'm bringing organization A to the table and I'm bringing organization B to the table, I need to know ahead of time before I invite them, what is their relationship? Are they going to get along? Are they going to cause tension within this group? So there's a lot of planning that goes into the beginning stages, a lot of convincing organizations to be part of the network or part of the project that you're working on. And once you get them there, now you're moving into the progress of keeping them coming back, right? It's a tedious process at the beginning where you're building collaborations and you're mending ideas together and you're meshing ideas and you're bringing folks together. If you don't keep that consistent and open communication in this process, you're going to lose people. So a lot of times we see projects, they come together, they have a great idea, but they never get past the speaking stage where everyone comes together and shares ideas. They're not moving forward. They're not progressing with a plan. They're not progressing with anything. If you fall into that trap, you're going to lose partners. And the greatest way to understand that is, I always say this to people in collaborations when they come back from meetings, like, oh, what are you guys working on? And I hear this a lot is, I really don't know. We've been talking about the same thing for the last 3 months, right? That's a problem with your collaboration. So success in bringing people together is important. Success in keeping people interested within the project by moving forward tangible ideas into strategies, into implementation, into outcomes over the course of the time. And then working together is success. When you actually have an entire project up and running, structured, and you're seeing how it works, it's truly amazing. But now the real work goes into play because you have to keep that going every single day and that process working. So great comment, but it's a lot of work to keep collaborations together. And but the success is really beneficial to that. Next slide. So, as I mentioned, how to lead a collaboration is really, really important. It is a joint ownership project, right? If you're a single agency and you're bringing a collaboration together and that one agency owns that collaboration or owns that idea, it's going to fall apart. So you have to develop a structure, a cross-sector ownership structure of whatever it is that you're working on, whatever management structure that you want to put in place, where everybody, where that shared voice that we talked about, that shared ownership, where I can make a decision on the direction that we're going in. Where does this happen? Where does this take place within your network? Next slide. So the easiest way to do that is to convene a policy steering committee or an advisory board, right? These are the initial folks, the stakeholders that you felt that were really important, that are going to take ownership of this project, and you bring them together. In the early stages, you're going to bring them together more often than not. You're probably looking at once a week, once a month. If you're starting a project and you're putting it out quarterly, you're never going to get to where you want to be. So on the front end, you need to meet more often. Well, this group comes together, and this is the group that sort of owns the direction of the project. Where are we going with? This is where the decisions are made. This is where strategies are outlined. This is where information is presented and evaluated with this multidisciplinary group that is cross-sector. And here's the key to this group. Everybody's equal. So if I'm a pastor at a street front church in the community, and your program is, reaching out to folks who have been exposed to violence through the use of a church, and I'm sitting on this steering committee, and next to me is the chief of police, and next to me is the U.S. attorney, my voice matters just as much as theirs. And that's an important thing to understand to those that are leading these collaborations, is that everybody has a voice and everybody's equal when it comes to these oversight or policy steering committees. You want to develop clear roles in these committees. You want to develop clear processes of how issues are developed, how programs are moving forward, how decisions are made. You want to have a structure and an MOU related to that oversight, because this is the group that's going to guide you through your planning, through your implementation, through your evaluation, and any readjustments that you have. And it may change throughout the course of the project, but the roles and responsibilities of that group are going to stay the same. Next slide, please. So an easier way to do that and look at when you're building a collective impact or collaboration, however that you're defining and look at, there's probably 5 things that you want to look at. One is a common agenda. What is it that we're all looking and we are looking to work towards? Why am I committing my resources towards this? Why am I here today? Here's the goal. Here's what we want to achieve. There's no uncertainty, but a lot of clarity in that understanding. We all know what we're working towards, and we all know how to get there. There's shared measurement, that we're looking at data from a whole different lot of sources, and we're coming together and we're providing. So if you're an organization that's participating, you have to contribute to that data sharing. If you're getting money or you're getting funding, you have to contribute to that evaluation process. The money comes in. So it's how do we collect data? How do we collect it from multiple sources? How do we manage that data? How do we manage performance? Agencies that are getting money to provide strategies, how are we holding them accountable? Are we sharing their monthly progress reports? Are we sharing information about the successes and the failures on a regular basis? This group and this board is looking at all that information on a regular basis. The fact that we're looking at mutually supportive activities of groups and organizations, what that means is our strategies are designed in a way to complement one another. We're not asking people to come to the table and do something completely that they they don't ordinarily do. When I ask them to do an activity that they've never done before, we brought them to the table because they're experts, but we want to coordinate what they do with other people doing. If I'm putting a GREAT, which is a gang prevention program in an elementary school, and I'm funding a source to do that, whether it's a police officer or somebody else, and they're teaching that program, I expect them not just to teach that program to the general population, but they're looking at kids on a regular basis and who are high risk to be involved in violence. And through that GREAT program, they're making referrals to another organization in the project that works with high risk families. And that organization who works with high risk families, they're doing an assessment of that family. And if that family needs additional resources that they don't have, they're connecting to another organization within our network that has those resources. So every strategy that's put in place should coordinate and complement all the other strategies in your project, where you're working together as a whole, and you don't just have multiple projects that are going, but you're not really coordinating those efforts and those strategies together around that population or issue that you're looking at. Continual communication, and this is the most difficult part of a collaboration. The larger you get, the harder it is, but it's so critical. We have to keep everybody involved on a regular basis, informed of what we're doing. If your partners feel like, I haven't heard anything, I don't know what they're doing right now, I don't know what this group is doing, that's going to cause distress within the structure, discontent within the structure. So you have to build up a process of how you're going to communicate, not vertically up and down levels, but also horizontally across sector and across partners. And that's what builds trust among partners. If you're keeping me informed about what's going on, then I know you value me and you trust me. If you're not telling me about what's going on, you're occasionally giving me an update, then you don't really value my participation in this process. So continual communication, extremely important. And if you choose to go with a backbone organization, then there needs to be really clear roles. If you have a large collaboration and your policy steering committee owns that, you have a backbone organization, and their job is strictly, setting the meetings, keeping the programs in play, moving those meetings forward, setting up budgets, setting up this. They're the administrative aspect of the project. They're critical. They're very critical to the success of a larger collaboration. The danger of backbone organizations is that if it's not done correctly and the rules are not put in place as to the backbone organization is more the administrative oversight or responsibility of the project, and that backbone organization starts to take ownership and more ownership of the project, and you're taking that away from the advisory board and the oversight, it could cause you a lot of conflicts, because then people will start to say, this is no longer a joint ownership, it's this organization owns this, and they're taking it down their direction. So be very careful with the organizations that are providing those backbone services, because they could be very successful in getting you where you need to be, or if they're not managed correctly, it could cause you problems that you don't want. Next slide, please. And how you do that in any collaboration, folks, is really clarity of roles, defining your strategies. What are the expectations? If I'm coming into your project, what's the management structure of this project? If there's a policy steering committee, what are the roles of the people on that? If you have chairman, what are the roles of the chairman? If you have a backbone agency, what are their roles? We have to really clarify those roles to move the project forward. You don't want confusion. You don't want competition down the line, because undoubtedly you're going to have conflicts and issues that arise. And when you're trying to figure out whose job is it to solve these, or whose job is it to address these, it's going to be too late. The problem's going to blow up on you. So you really do need to really have some forethought into how you're setting up your projects and your partners. Remember, you're bringing everybody to the table because they have a set of expertise. Rely on that expertise. Don't force people to do things that they don't ordinarily do outside of their comfort zone or outside of the scope of what their missions are. Support them in what they're doing. Shared authority, you do that through agendas and memorandums, a lot of MOAs. The larger the collaboration, the more MOAs or MOUs that you're going to have, really showing how this collaboration works. And more importantly, there's a clear understanding of each person's commitment and role. And that really comes down to is we value everybody. Everybody who's at our table working together, they have a value. So if you're the person running the project, your time should be equally spent amongst everybody the best you can. You need to be reaching out to your partners on a regular basis. Those of you that run projects like this or have run projects like this, I'm sure you'll agree with me, 90% of the job of a project manager or director of a collaboration like this is nurturing and building relationships. And it's through the relationships that the collaborations are successful. So next slide. And at the very end, our goal is to build trust, right? We want to build public trust in what we're doing, that the services that we're providing are effective. We want to build trust with our partners, that we're using their resources, their time, their commitments appropriately. So everything we do wants to build trust. Nothing in our project should violate that ability to have trust with people. If a partner is acting in a way that destroys the trust of the collaborative, that's a problem. You need to address with that early on. Do that. And people who join a collaboration want to know that if I'm coming into this collaboration and I'm putting my agency's reputation on the line as being part of this collaboration, I expect the standards that everybody in this organization is going to hold up, that none of us take a hit because of one organization does. We see this a lot in violence prevention programs that go haywire, where individuals get arrested and things go on. But we have to provide that level of trust. Building blocks to that, strategic planning, have a roadmap, have a framework where we know where we're starting, where we want to be. Everybody knows, and we're progressing through that. And there's a visual. I can see where we're moving through. We're looking at community driven. You want community partners. You want everybody on there. You want people, different ideas. You want the community has to be part owner of this. Not have to be full owner, but they have to have an ownership of this. If it's driven by the city and you're not allowing the community to make decisions, then you got a problem. You want the community to know that they have a say in this. Accountability, all the agencies, if you're getting funding, are you doing what you're supposed to be doing? Is the project as a whole doing what it's supposed to be doing? That's directly related to communication, periodic reports. Transparency, never should be any hidden agendas of what we're doing. If anybody says, hey, I want information about this project, or I want information about what you're doing, we should never say, oh, we can't give that to you. I mean, there are some HIPAA things. I'm not talking about information specific about individuals, but if we're asking about, a project where multiple agencies are working together and we're funding all these organizations, and somebody says, well, I want to know, how you did that funding process. Was that an open process? Was it a sole source process? You should be able to answer those questions. If you're not transparent, you're going to tear down that, that fabric of trust that's built within your collaboration. So make sure you do that. So strategic planning, community involvement, accountability, transparency throughout the entire project to all partners involved. That's how you build public trust. If you have public trust in what you're doing, and you come towards the end of your project and you're funded and your funding's running out, that's where that public trust is really going to pay the dividends, right? Because the community and the agencies are going to come support that, and they're going to say to your funders, this is too valuable of a program to get rid of. And they're going to, instead of you fighting for that or your collaboration fighting for that, you're going to have the whole community behind you. And that's very powerful when you're trying to convince a council or others to city council to give you dollars. Next slide. So those are the basics of really understanding of building a collaboration. And we kind of gave the elementary approach to that. It's very straightforward though. But, when you're building a collaboration, understand, what your end goal is, who your partners should be, select your partners carefully, manage them carefully. And at the end of the day, as your project grows, so should your stakeholders should also grow as well too, whether more involvement or more diversity that goes on. Those are the basics of building a collaboration. To do this work, you need them. So I appreciate everybody's time, and I'm going to turn it back to Celeste.
All right. And thank you, Paul, for an excellent presentation. Here we have some resources for you to take a look at. And with that, you can see all the different various resources through NGC. We welcome you to visit our website so you can tap into some of those resources. And I'd like to invite you, Paul, to join our panel presentation. I have the distinct pleasure of introducing our other two panelists today. And I want to also acknowledge all the people, first of all, for your comments in the chat. And we'll probably get to some of them. I know there was a question on that, and just real briefly on the chart where it said who else should be on the committee. We got a lot of great responses. There was somebody mentioned community leaders with no titles, City Hall, Chamber of Commerce, everyday residents of hotspots, trauma surgeons, convenience store reps, and advocates, just to name a few. So I know some of this will be addressed in our panel discussion. But with that, I am honored to introduce Rosalind Dashiell. Rosalind Dashiell, and Rosalind, there you are, the Executive Director of PE Kids, and she has a responsibility for overseeing the agency's programs, development, staff, and community outreach, and executing its strategic strategic initiatives. Rosalind has more than 20 years of well-rounded experience in the corporate and nonprofit sectors, including spearheading infrastructure initiatives, writing and managing grants, no small task, compliance and reporting, institutional marketing, and staff, fiscal, and organizational management. And so welcome, Rosalind. And I'd also like to introduce Mr. Sean Boyle. Sean Boyle currently serves as the Executive Director and CEO of the Children's Service Council of St. Lucie County, Florida, where he has worked since 1997. The Children's Service Council works with and funds 50 community programs that provide services to over 40,000 children and their families in St. Lucie County. Through his various roles, Mr. Boyle has worked with residents, churches, and local nonprofits in the community to design and or fund effective children and youth programs for more than 20 years. And as you can see probably in the chat, that Sean is very apt to answer your questions in real time and offer very good suggestions. So I saw one of your suggestions there, Sean, and I thought it was great. So, and it was regarding the extroverts, make sure that you have introverts engage in your discussions as well. So I love to hear those types of tips for everyone. So, so with that, I'd like to ask Rosalind and Sean if you'd like to add anything to, hopefully I did it justice, but if you'd like to add anything to the introduction or add a few words about your experience. So Rosalind?
Sure. So first of all, I just want to thank Paul for a phenomenal presentation. Many of the points he made really resonate with my experience at PEI Kids and our efforts in building collaboratives. And I'm really looking forward to sharing our experience, our strengths, and our challenges, and really, bringing to life and providing some real world examples of some of the things that Paul discussed in his presentation. So really looking forward to it. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Sean?
Yeah, I'll just add, I was expecting a mic drop and we would just end the seminar because he did such a great job. But I'll just let everybody know that I sit on the steering committee for our effort. I am not in the day-to-day operations of it, but I do have a unique perspective because I'm a funder. And I was brought in the middle of it, not thinking I was going to be involved in it at all as far as funding, but I'll talk about the strategy of how they wrote me in, and I'm an active steering committee member now.
Everyone will be very interested in that, I'm sure. So with that, why don't we go ahead, and I have a few questions for you. And the first one is a two-part question. So, Rosalind, I'll start with you. So describe ways in which partners have been brought on board with the initiative, and then how do you ensure equitable representation?
A good question. So, I will say, up front, you really got to do the legwork in terms of bringing on partners. You really can't take any shortcuts. You've got to do the due diligence, do the site visits, see what their programs are all about, meet with program staff, meet with leadership. And Paul mentioned this, you've got to have the leadership buy-in in order for your collaboration to work. And don't be afraid to say no. If you find when you do your due diligence that a partner might not really be a good fit for you. We've certainly had to say no. For our project, historically, PEI Kids has dealt with, work closely with juvenile probation, working with offenders and youth involved in gangs. But for this project, funding that we got from DOJ is really geared toward helping victims of gang violence. So it really was a new perspective for us in working with youth. And so we had to really do our legwork in building partnerships on two levels: for referrals for victims, which had not been a traditional pipeline for us, as well as providers to provide direct services once we got those referrals. So the good thing I will say starting out is that, we've been in the community doing this work for 23 years. So we had a really good reputation and we had some really good connections with strong partners. So, folks like juvenile probation, often though they're working with offenders, many times those are the same youth who become victims as well of violence. So they were a good source of referrals. So we kind of had to shift focus with them and let them know we've got services now for victims as well. Also reaching out to our trauma center, which is Capitol Health here in Trenton, because Interestingly, when we got this funding, they also got funding from our state attorney general's office to help adult victims of violence. So they were able to help adults. And we immediately partnered with them and say, hey, we've got funding to help youth victims. So together we can support the entire family. So it's really looking strategically at who's going to make a good partner for your projects initiatives and how can you support each other's goals and missions, within that collaborative. So we did the work. And then, the other thing I looked for in addition to those who provide direct services are the folks in our community who are the influencers, who have the political and professional capital. So even though they might not be direct service providers, you want to bring them on in an advisory capacity to be part of your advisory board. Because when I go into a meeting with the head of the County Youth Services Commission with me, suddenly I've got leadership's attention. They want to be nice, they want to be agreeable, and they want to work with us because this person also provides funding for them. So it's important that you get those influencers involved in your collaborative. And don't be afraid to bring them with you to those meetings. Bring your partners and your social and community influencers with you. So those are the things that have really helped us build a strong collaborative.
Thank you, Roz. Thank you, Roz. Sean, same
Yeah,
question.
so yeah, same question. So I'm gonna say all this, and I don't want anybody to be like, oh, that will never happen in our community, because I'm gonna back up and I'm gonna tell you how it got started. So in St. Lucie County, we have an entity called the Roundtable of St. Lucie County. It is a membership-driven organization. All the members pay dues. And they are the lead for our national gang model, our gang model in St. Lucie County. The Roundtable has been established. It predates me, so it's around 25 years old, and it contains members of. It contains the head of the 3 law enforcement agencies. It contains elected officials from the city and the county. It also includes the head of the Department of Juvenile Justice, the head of the school board, head of Department of Children and Families, the head of our Chamber of Commerce. I won't go through all the heads, but it's the head of all the organizations that either can affect policy or funding. Now, if you're listening, you're like, wow, they must have a lot of money in their community. There's basically 2 funders at the table, us and the United Way. We're not a super wealthy community by any means. But they are set up as the steering committee, and the Roundtable was originally formed because way back in the early 1990s, we did not have a juvenile assessment center. And the mayor of our largest city sat down with our juvenile justice, the head of Department of Juvenile Justice, and the Children's Services Council, because we're a funder, and said, what can we do to get a juvenile assessment center? So the 3 of them met for a couple of months, and they said, who would really be involved, needs to be involved in this? Is the law enforcement agency. So they brought members on one at a time, and fast forward 20 plus years, it's over 30 plus heads of organizations that can impact policy and or funding meet monthly. And we bring them together to address issues to help cut through the red tape. So one of the things that we're working on is the gang model program. And having a collective and bringing everybody together, it's really what Paul and Rosalind just said. You got to make sure that the head of the Department of Corrections understands why he is at that table, because he's not a natural part. We have the head of the fire department at that table monthly to address children and youth issues. We have to make sure that he understands his role and that he has a purpose there. And so we meet monthly, and it's important that you have an agenda that is action oriented. People get tired of just going to meetings, and it's like what Paul said. I actually quit a meeting a couple of years ago because I could close my eyes and go forward 2 years or behind 2 years, and we're talking about the exact same thing. You got to move forward and go action oriented. So this group actually forms a strategic plan for children and youth every 5 years based on the Communities That Care model. And we move it. We all work at it. We're all singing from the same choir sheet. So that's where we brought in. I sit on the steering committee for our national gang model. Now to get to, because it's all the CEOs, right? We're all in our offices, and I get out a lot in the community, but we're all in our offices. How do we hear directly from the residents, particularly in the area that we're addressing? And so we formed an advisory committee, just as Rosalind mentioned, and the committee meets in the afternoon. It meets in the community. We try to involve youth, but we have all those connectors in the community. They may not hold the title of a CEO of an organization, but they are the the people in the community that, it's Marjorie Harrell and Betty Bradwell, they're active in their church. Everybody knows if you want to know what's going on in that area, you speak to those two ladies. And then we also, the roundtable also, I forgot to mention, amongst those 30 members, we also have a steering committee. So we have networks that are working on issues like safe neighborhoods, economic employability for our youth, teen pregnancy, infant health, for example. And those networks are all include all the service providers. So the roundtable has really been the hub in our community to bring all the leaders and all the service providers together to work on the same choir sheet, if you will.
That's great, because between both of you, Roz and Sean, what you said too, you looked at opportunities, and it sounds also like you brought in someone, and the person you brought in also was connected to someone else, and that you were able to build your collaboration. So go ahead, Roz.
Can I address the second part of your question about equity?
Yes.
So, probably like many communities around the country, in Trenton, we've really seen a huge increase in the number of non-US born residents in our community from Central and South America. So, of course, it's fundamental. You've got to have bilingual staff that's culturally competent and that's diverse. But beyond that, I want to mention, you've also got to be prepared to deal with the diverse range of issues that might come with dealing with a diverse population. So, sometimes, the victimization is just kind of an entry point into their lives. And then you see there are a lot of other needs that they have that need to be addressed before you can really begin to help them heal. So we've had to deal with issues like deportation, homelessness, any number of issues. So you've got to be prepared to deal with that if you really want to work with folks in an equitable way and make a meaningful difference in their lives through your work. Also, we have a collaboration with the College of New Jersey. They have what's called a Bonner program. So they send us a team of Bonner scholars. That's 5 students that come and work in our program with our youth. They're working with them daily. They sort of serve as peer mentors. They model appropriate behavior. I'm old. Young folks don't want to hear from me. But when you can get a good, effective team of young people to work with your youth, it really makes a difference. It really helps them take notice. So equity is I look at that through a really broad lens. It's got to be culturally appropriate, age appropriate to really have an impact, in our kids' lives.
That's a great point. Anything you'd like to add, Sean or Paul, to that question? Or any?
No, I just think that, and this sounds so obvious, but it's so hard to do effectively. You can't just like, hey, we're going to have a meeting, we're going to talk about gang issues and expect people to come regularly. It's really all about communication. And sometimes the leader of the group may not be the best communicator to a certain person. And it's kind of like what Paul mentioned, the relationships and like if I need to speak to the district attorney, the DA, I'm probably not the best messenger because he's going to be like, who's that guy? But, I could bring the sheriff because the sheriff would do it and he's the best messenger. So I would just say, don't think that you can just hold the meeting, have an agenda and think you're done. It's really all about connecting them and you really have to sit down with them. I think the reason why the roundtable has maintained such cohesiveness throughout the years is one, it has a paid staff person, two actually paid staff through its membership to make those relationships and that commitment real. And then the other thing I would say is, and I know I'm probably jumping ahead, is when you start getting down to it, put things in writing, put down the commitments of what everybody's going to do in an MOU and have everybody sign it. And because there's going to be times, and we're going through this now a little bit, where, change in leadership may change the dynamic of the group and or the commitment of the group. And if you've got something in writing, you can always lean back on that document as the base to help continue to secure those commitments.
Yep, good point. Did you have something, Paul?
Yeah, I would just add to that is don't underestimate the need to pre-plan when you're building collaborations. And biggest mistake I ever learned, or lesson I learned in my life, was early on in my career. I held a multi-agency meeting, the first one, we put something to vote and all hell broke loose. And after the meeting, someone came up to me and gave me the best advice. And that was never put anything to vote unless you know what the answer is going to be. Right. So it saves you a lot of heartache. When you're building collaborations, instead of sending a meeting, an agenda out to people and say, hey, we want to invite you, it's about personal relationships. So take that time to go to those key organizations. If you're leading this project or heading up this project, it's that personal interaction and ask them, we're here to support you. What can our project do for you? And then what you're going to find is a common denominator that comes up of all these meetings. And that is, we can't do this alone. We feel like we're out here alone. We feel like we're doing this. We don't have enough resources. When you get everybody at that level, then you can send a letter out and saying, hey, I spoke to a lot of you and you all have something in common, that you all need help, like you all need each other to support. So let's come together and talk about that. And that's what we're going to talk about. So often when we get funding, we have ideas, we're rushing to put people together and we want to bring people together. Never underestimate the time it takes to build a coalition. And it's about personal relationships and being out there and making people valued. And if you've ever seen the movie Inception, sometimes it's about planting ideas out there where the folks come around and begin to understand, like, okay, that makes sense. But you want that collective agreement of why you're bringing people together. It'll just make your process go a lot smoother.
That's a great point also. Thank you. And again, we may have jumped into the next question, but I think there's still more discussion about it. So how has the initiative strengthened and sustained existing partnerships? So I'll start with you again, Ross, if that's okay.
Sure.
It's another two-part question. So, and then if you could provide some examples demonstrating ways in which partners have become invested in the initiative.
Absolutely. So, I will say this is, starting a collaborative is like raising a child. You put all this time and effort and energy into it. And then, once you get it on its feet, you kind of have to let it go and share ownership. You've got to let your partner, you've brought partners in because they have a certain expertise that they can lend to the project. You've got to let them own that piece of it. So, what we do is we have monthly MDT meetings with all of our direct service partners. And, when we get referrals throughout the month, we bring them to the table and our case manager says, I've got Jose, he's 15 years old, he's on probation, here's what happened to him, let's roundtable it, so, Catholic Charities says what they think this kid should have in terms of counseling. Anchor House says what they need in terms of socialization. CMO says, okay, he's got special needs. Here's what we think he needs. And we actually develop a care plan based on what our partners and their experts say we need to do for this child. So, you've got to make the right decision in bringing on your partners and then trust that decision and let them do the work. And that really gives them a sense of ownership in the project. And then they show up, and then when you make a referral to them for services, they know the background, they've been involved, they know exactly what role they're playing in this child's care. So it really makes for a more meaningful partnership when you kind of share the responsibility for it. So our monthly MDT meetings are really meaningful in that regard. And I would also say, like Paul was saying, you've got to give something back too. So leverage your expertise. We all have an expertise in something. So what we offer is our project director offers gang training to all of our partners. He says, I'll come in and train your staff, on how to be safe when they're out in the community, on what current gang trends are in our community, what neighborhoods they need to stay away from for the next few weeks. So we offer in return training to our partners so they can check that box off their list that, okay, we've had staff training this month. So you've got to look at it from their perspective, what they bring to the table, and really respect that and always be willing to give back. And that's what works for us. In terms of examples of how partners have invested, because of the partnerships we brought on just recently, I'd say over the past 2 months, I've had partners reach out to us and say, hey, I just got funding for a community violence intervention program from the city of Trenton. We want you to be a part of this. Tell us what you can do and what you need. I got a call from the prosecutor's office, with COVID, folks hadn't been in the same room for a long time. So our county prosecutor asked all the chiefs of police from every municipality to come for a roundtable, and they asked us to speak, about the services we offer through this initiative, our victim services for youth. So because of the partnerships we've developed, we're top of mind, and they call us to the table, whenever they think of a group that needs services where we could be of assistance, and it's really helping the collaborative and the project grow.
Yeah, those are great points. Thank you, Roz. Great points. Anyone else?
I'll just add, and because Rosalind just brought up something I completely forgot about. Our group meets, I'm sorry, the law enforcement and the staff that work directly with gang members and or youth that are going into gangs. They meet monthly and they staff cases, for example. And I think what that has done is, and I don't think it would have happened without this initiative, is, you can sit down and talk about a kid and you're like, oh, he should go to this agency. But then to hear somebody say, well, he tried to get in, however, this was the red tape he or she got into. And you don't really notice those, you think you build these programs and, you fund them and they're up and going and everything is good. And until you actually hear from the clients directly or hear from the people that are working directly with the clients and saying, yeah, that what you think it's doing, it's not, or there's an obstacle here, it's really helped shape our system of care for the better, I believe, because we're starting to kind of find those little hiccups in there that really weren't intended, but they're definitely in there. So I think there's an advantage or a strengthening of the partnerships through that. And you have to create that environment where, because sometimes those partners are there at the table, right? It has to be it's like Vegas, right? What's spoken here stays here. Nobody wants to go around and go, ooh, I got a dysfunctional organization, or we've got these issues. So you need to create that environment. But at the bigger picture, I mentioned before that I'm a funder, and I've obviously I've been on the roundtable for a while, and I knew about the initiative. But when it first was brought to us, I deal primarily the programs that we fund are primarily prevention programs, early intervention, and our sweet spot is the 5 to 9 year olds. If you look at our 40,000, that's the biggest chunk. And if you think about it from a prevention standpoint, that totally makes sense, right? Mm-hmm. So when this gang initiative came, I was told, and I always believed that it was probably 16 and older, 24 years of age, 21 years of age. But listening to it and the dialogue that would happen every month, it definitely dawned on me, and both obvious and not so obvious, was that they're a lot younger. I mean, a lot younger. We're talking 10, 11, 12-year-olds. That's definitely the realm of where I'm in. And so when we talk about at the roundtable level, our steering committee, if you will, it's not just the impact of like individual clients that they're working with, individual members. It's also broadening, the impact on the community. And I say that because you talk about strengthening partnerships. If I told you, if you told me at the beginning when we did this that the county would be funding it, not because of just safety issues, but because of tourism and economic issues, that our Department of Public Health would be just as invested as anybody else. Our housing authority is invested, because when you look at the gang and violence issue, if you look at it just as gang violence in neighborhoods and kids and adults, it's very narrow focus. But when you expand it to the impact in the school system, the impact on the economics of the community, the impact of the health of the community, the impact of housing, you really broaden your catchment area for bringing partners in. And then what our initiative has done, and I think this is the reason why they were able to attract funders such as myself, is every funder wants to fund a success. You're going to get a couple of funders that are willing to take a shot, but trust me, they're taking a calculated shot, because every funder wants to attach themselves to success. So when you have an initiative 1 or 2 years in, be sure to get it evaluated, because if you can demonstrate success, I promise you, every funder, you're going to perk the ears of every funder, because everybody wants to attach themselves to a successful project.
That's a very good point. Very good point. Yes. Thank you for that. And it also goes with what Roz was saying too, is like when people start to look for you and they start to seek you out as the person that's going to be able to provide the services or to partner with, that shows that they really trust the work that you're doing and that you're out in the community, and trust is really important. It's something that's built over time. So great points from both of you. Paul, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think those were really well points. I don't know if we have time for like that last question. How is the initiative adapted to changing? Is that where you're at? Community circumstances?
No, I was going to get to that one, but
Okay.
You want to start with that one? You
I'm
can go
sorry. Yeah, I
ahead.
was just going to talk to that. I didn't know what
Sure.
time we're at, but
Yeah, we still have time. Go ahead.
two things I wanted to do that I think are really critical at this point in time for collaborations that are building or are in existence right now is that let's talk in two areas. One is the pandemic, right, which isolated people, and if you had contracts already in place and programs in place, a lot of organizations switched to, like, if we're funding an organization to provide anger management or cognitive behavioral therapy to a population, that switched from in-person to online or telephone. But what we found is a lot of our clients have limited cellular access, or their cellular plans run out on a regular basis, and sometimes they go periods without a phone, or they don't have access to internet, quality internet at least. So those services are really working out. So it does force you to begin to look at, okay, how do we interrupt these services? We don't want to stop these services. So it was an idea of, like, how do we bring in new tech partners that we never thought of from the beginning? Like, who's going to donate this? Who's going to donate that? Or who are our partners in our communities that can open up their facilities and allow individuals to come in an isolated area and use their computers or their phones and stuff. So the pandemic in itself has forced us to change, which, when you're building collaborations and maintaining collaborations, it's relational. So it caused a challenge. We have to think through that. The second aspect is some of the civil discourse that occurred over the last couple of years related to different issues that occurred in the community, between the community and police, and issues. In Louisville, we're ground zero for that, right? We had the Breonna Taylor case here that left a huge tear in our fabric of relationships between the community and law enforcement that we have to repair. But now, running a collaboration, we have to be aware of that there are some of these feelings in the community. We don't force people to come together. We don't force ideas on people. We don't force them to come together. So we're in a way of rebuilding, but we're taking a step back and looking at, okay, at the same time, we want to move projects forward. We really have to solidify these relationships in a way that doesn't create more harm, but that's justifiable to everybody. And that is maybe smaller groups, bringing smaller representatives from different size together and sitting down before we can even move forward on certain projects to be sure that everybody's comfortable. So those two elements alone, the pandemic and some of the social discourse that has occurred, really changed the circumstances of projects. And I think those that have built relationships and recognize the value of those relationships can weather these elements if done correctly. And it might entail you to slow down what you're doing and reevaluate how you're bringing people together, but you can weather them.
Very good points. Never a bad idea to slow down and reflect on what's been done and how to move forward. Yeah, sometimes there's not a lot of time in projects where you can really take that time, but it's so important. I've heard you all talk about the importance of time for building relationships and also making sure that everything's in place that you need to. So Roz, do you have, so that same question. So how is the initiative adapted to changing community circumstances?
Well, yeah, I think COVID has taught us we're nothing if not adaptable, right? So, just in terms of dealing with change and what we're seeing, I would say there are really two trends. And like Sean mentioned, we're seeing kids younger and younger. I mean, our delinquency prevention programs, we're in the middle schools now, not the high schools. It's too late in high school. So, the work we're doing is with, 11, 12, and 13-year-olds. But also, since kids went back to school in September, we are seeing a huge increase of violence among girls. Up to now, our programs have been 95%, populated by young men. But now we actually just 2 weeks ago started a girls group because there just seems to be a lot of pent-up violence in our girls these days. And when we start dealing with girls, the other things we're finding in terms of gang activity is you've got to be prepared to address the sexual exploitation, because often girls are sexual commerce in gangs. They are exploited or abused and don't even realize it. We do have a counseling program for child victims of sexual abuse. So we're able to connect these girls to that program right away. But, so we are seeing, issues with girls around sexual abuse and sexual exploitation, and finding that we're really getting a lot more referrals for young girls now.
Good point.
So, those are just some of the changes and the trends we're seeing and how we've had to adapt.
I'll just add to that because I just echo the same thing. COVID, we just had we do a radio show. We had a mental health professional. The Surgeon General has declared it a mental health emergency, and we know. I mean, anyone that's worked with everybody is impacted by COVID. We all are mental health, but we're definitely see that, and then that just exasperates the trauma that a lot of these young men and women have. But what we're seeing, and I already alluded to it, is we're seeing it go younger and younger. I think we just had a 9 or 10-year-old bring a loaded gun to school. And so, we have to start, looking at, what we thought was 16, 17, 18, 20, 21, 22 is really starting to get down to 9, 10-year-old that we need to start addressing. I do want to just quickly say before we completely pivot, and this is sort of related to the question, there's going to come a time when you bring groups together that you have to call partners out. I mean, you just got to call people to the table to hold them accountable, not in a bad way. Never do that publicly. Never do that publicly. And if you have an issue, and we had, I'll keep everything broad to protect them just in case they're on here. But if you have an issue and it has to be brought up in the meeting, call that provider ahead of time. Let them know what you want to talk about. Hear their side of the story. And word it in such a way that you're not just saying, hey, they're not doing their job. Do it diplomatically, but give them the heads up. So that they can be prepared and or address the situation before you go in a group setting, because nothing will break trust quicker than if you embarrass a provider and not give them a heads up. They may or may not ever come back.
Thank you for those points. We've completed the formal questions, but we did have and I just will probably pick one question out of here because because for the sake of time, because I think we're running close to the time we need to wrap up. But we did have one question, and I think it's a question that always comes up, and I know you've addressed it in some ways, but if you could specifically give some pointers on how do you get the community to be involved? And there was it basically says to take back their communities. How do you gain the trust of communities? So what advice would you give, or what has worked, and how do you gain the trust in terms of your program or bringing in community partners to your initiative? Let's say you don't have any community partners. How do you build that trust and bring somebody on board to the initiative? How would you identify someone?
So if I could jump in, I would say, well, first of all, you've got to be out in the community. You can't do this work from a conference room or a meeting room. You've got to really be willing to get out there, have some of your meetings, in community centers, in public housing meeting rooms. You've got to be out there, and you'll find there are good folks in the community who want to be involved and want to make a difference. So be open to that, be willing to find a place for volunteers. People want to feel like they're doing something and like they're making a difference. And often that leads to word of mouth in the community, which is the best endorsement you can get. So be willing to find a place for folks in the community, in your project or in your initiative, whether it's on the advisory board, whether it's providing you with information that you can shoot out in a bulletin, and a safety bulletin to your other partners if they know something's going on. There's a place for everyone in your project. And sometimes it takes a little work. Sometimes I get folks to volunteer and I'm like, what am I going to do with these people? I have not nothing, but you've got it. That's part of the work when you're a community-based organization. So we're nothing without our community. So you've got to find a place for these folks to make a difference, and really make a meaningful difference.
Great point. Anyone else?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the relationships and the trust that you're building early on. I go back to a project we did in Denver. We went to a neighborhood in Southwest Denver where it was experiencing a lot of violence. And we brought a community together, and we thought, okay, we're gonna have this great conversation about gang violence in their community, and people are getting shot. But the conversation shifted to their top priority in that community at that time was loose dogs. They had a lot of kids that were walking to school, and loose dogs were biting the kids. And we would circle that and then circle back to, well, your kids are getting shot. And then the community group circle back to the loose dogs. And we realized early on that we had to listen. We had to spend time to just listen and get to know and build that relationship with the communities. We knew that we couldn't get them to discuss gang violence unless we helped them and supported them on their primary concern, not ours, but it was theirs, and recognized that it was their primary concern was these loose dogs. So we had to help develop a program, bring in different city agencies and work with them. In our first round, and another organization kind of took the lead for us because that was out of really our realm of what we were doing. But we partnered with them on coming up solutions for the loose dogs. And we empowered them to come up with the solutions. And once they saw that same group then was ready to come back to the table and say, hey, let's take something else on. And then we got to finally to gangs. Like, all right, this is an issue that's in the city. So again, that gangs was our priority for that community. It wasn't the community's priority. They knew they had an issue, but for them at that immediate time, it was the dogs, and respecting that in a way too, and saying, I understand, okay, from their perspective, we have to understand that, and to get them on board and build that relationship, let's help them address this first. So it is understanding that and listening.
Yeah, no, those are really great points. And this has been such a rich discussion, and I can't really do it justice in my wrap up, but some of the things I took away from it were like systems of change within a culture of shared responsibility. I think that kind of came through as you were talking. Adaptive change that build capacity and relationships among broad partnerships, and then tap into the expertise in the community. Be sure you do that at every level, be out in the community. And then collaborations can be used to address some of these broader issues, because it sounds like from the initial formation of your committees, a lot of things, there were a lot of networks built, and it's just the power of collaboration. It's the power of people connecting, people working together, coming together. And I just want to again thank our wonderful panelists today, Paul Callanan, Rosalind DeShiel, and Sean Boyle. This has been excellent, and I hope that you all stick around to to complete the survey, and just stay online for a few more minutes. And then I think, Sterling, you're going to come back online, correct?
Yes, I just wanted to thank everyone for such a great session.
Oh, I think we lost you, Sterling.
Excuse me. Thank you all for joining us today. I just want to give another thank you to our great presenters and panelists. I think that was an amazing discussion. I just wanted to invite everyone, if you have any more questions that were not addressed today, or if you're in need of any additional resources, you can reach out to the National Gang Center at the following email address or website. As there's a reminder as well, there were previous webinars in this series, so you can view those recordings as well on our National Gang Center YouTube channel. A recording of this section will actually be available on the YouTube channel shortly following the event. So as we close out, I don't know if any of our presenters or panelists have any final comments they would like to make. Any final comments, Paul?
I just think we're at an opportunity right now where we hear a lot about reimagining public safety. And we've always heard that the police departments can't do this alone and they need community support. And I think we're at an opportunity now where there is support behind the reimagining public safety. What does that mean, and what does that mean to violence reduction? And let's be innovative of what we're doing. We don't need to just keep relying on what other cities are doing, what others are doing. Never forget the power and the innovation that you have within your own community and the ideas that people have in their own community, and really take advantage of this opportunity to say and discuss really what does that mean, reimagining public safety and the role of community in violence reduction.
Rosalind, maybe would you have any final comments?
Sure. I just want to kind of reemphasize the point that, people ultimately work with people they like. So relationships are really important. So just, even without a collaborative, just be mindful of the relationships you have, valuing everyone's input and expertise, because you never know what's around the corner or what project you're going to be working on. And it really pays to have those relationships beforehand when you want to build your collaborative. And I just want to tell Paul, I think Loose Dogs is a great name for a rock band.
It is kind of catchy, Roz. I would
catchy. Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome. Sean?
All the above, for sure. The only thing I would say is make sure that you, and I apologize, my internet cut out when you asked about how you make sure everybody can hear voices. I would say use technology to make sure that everybody's voice is heard. I put it in the chat. I learned this through the pandemic. When you couldn't meet, I got greater participation when I used technology, and I heard from more voices than I would if I was meeting in person. And I clearly believe that's because you have introverts and extroverts, and I'm speaking as an introvert. Sometimes extroverts will crowd out those voices. And the other thing that we've been doing in St. Lucie County, which I'll be honest with you, I didn't like at first, but now I think it's great. All of our steering committee meetings are held on Facebook. So any resident can watch what we're discussing. And trust me, that's another level of accountability as well, because all those CEOs know that the general public is watching. So that's another way of transparency and accountability.
Yeah, I just want to thank you all again, because it's just been great discussion, great information that you've shared at multiple levels. And although each program or each initiative may be slightly different or different in different regions, right? So we've got Kentucky represented, we have New Jersey, great state of New Jersey, great state of Kentucky, and the great state of Florida, of course, which is where I am also. So, but I would just say that it's just been really interesting to hear your discussion about what has worked, how you've built these relationships, and how you've built them. And I really think that the one thing that came through is that it does take time. And Raj, you mentioned this a lot, this strategy, and it came through with everyone's discussion that there was always a strategy, but it was a strategy built on cooperation and built on these relationships, and everyone that was joining the organization had a common goal. So I really just want to thank you all again for your participation today. There were a lot of comments in the chat. I'm sorry we couldn't get to talk about as much as we would have liked to. There was a lot of things that we covered today, and but I think it was just really fruitful. And if this is actually our last webinar before next year, so I just want to wish everyone that's been on the all our participants today and all the panelists a very happy holiday, and be safe, and thank you once again. So I think that's it. Sterling, do I need to give it back to you now?
All right, thank you, Celeste. And again, thank you to all of our presenters and panelists. So as you can see now, if you're still online, we ask that everyone take a few minutes to complete the feedback form coming up on your screen for today's webinar. You can complete the form by scanning the QR code here, or by clicking the link that was provided in the chat box. You may also be directed to it once you leave the webinar. This survey is completely anonymous and provides incredibly valuable information to guide our work. If you would like to receive a certificate for your participation today, we ask that you complete the survey. Upon completion, you will be directed to a form where you can request a certificate. We will leave the link open for a few more minutes so that everyone can complete the form. And we'd like to thank you all again for joining us. This will now conclude today's webinar. Have a great day and Happy New Year. Thank you.